They'll be looking at the current state of AI and digital transformation in media and CSO practice in Nigeria. The moderator for this panel is Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. She's from the New Central Television. Let's put our hands together for her. Interestingly, Fuad is going to be on this panel, so maybe we'll get an answer to that question. Let's see, please. What you
want? Good morning, everyone. Afternoon is in about 7 minutes, so we'll switch that up in a little bit. But thank you so much for your time and attention. Please let's give a round of applause to the previous panelists. They really set the pace and also set the agenda for the further conversations we're going to have. So let me bring my panelists up because I'm really anticipating this conversation. As a journalist working in Nigeria, I've seen what AI can do. I work in partnership at New Central with a fact-checking organization on the continent. And one of the things we've been doing is that we're looking into where AI is going. We're looking at AI digital videos and of course photographs and having to debunk this news for a wider audience. And that's one of the biggest concerns that many have. So let's start with my first panelist, Tsema Ede-okoye. She's the project lead for Joint Civic Defense Fund. Please a round of applause for her. It's still early in the morning. I think our applause can be a bit more energetic. Thank you very much. We also have Anita Eboigbe. She's the Chief of Staff for Big Cabal Media. Please a round of applause. Fuad Lawal, he's the founder Archive NG, and he's going to have to come and defend his writing prowess. Fuad, please join us on the stage. And definitely not least, but coming up on the stage now is Nelson Olanipekun. He's the CEO of Citizen Gavel. Please a round of applause for Nelson. So just a bit of an opening as I was looking at some of the conversations we're meant to have today. Now, we know that artificial intelligence and digital technologies are reshaping industries globally. And Nigeria is not an exception. We're not an island. Our media landscape and the operations of CSOs are being fundamentally transformed by these advancements, offering both unprecedented opportunities and significant challenges. In the media sector, AI is revolutionizing the way we gather, produce, and even disseminate news. And for CSOs, digital transformation is equally transformative. From data-driven advocacy to digital fundraising and enhanced community channels, you have integration of AI and digital tools enabling these organizations to operate more efficiently and effectively. So in this conversation, I want us to keep in mind the broader implications of our dialogue. That is, the future of AI and digital transformation in Nigeria hinges not only on technological advancements, but also thoughtful, inclusive, and ethical implementation. It is through collaborative efforts and shared wisdom that we can ensure these innovations serve the greater good of our society. So let the discussion begin. I'll ask a show of hands. How many people saw the AI picture of the Pope wearing that white puffer jacket? Okay, hands down. How many of you thought it was real? Are you telling me only one person in this audience thought that was really the Pope? Okay, so I'll confess, I almost fell for it. Sincerely, I almost fell for it. The only thing that stopped me was like, I've never seen a Pope wear a puffer jacket. So that's where my question came from. But if you looked at that picture, you could have sworn that it was the Pope. And that's the issue we're seeing with AI right now. So let me start first with Tsema, who's the project lead for Joint Civic Defense Fund. In terms of the usage of AI to protect civic space actors in Nigeria, where are we? Because this dialogue is meant to center the current and possibly look also at the future as well. Where are we right now?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, but I just want to correct it. It's Shema, not Tsema.
My apologies. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So yeah, interestingly, I was watching a show yesterday, Atlas. I don't know how many of us have seen Atlas on Netflix.
It's the new Jennifer Lopez movie.
Yeah, wow. And so, you know, it's what everybody has been saying about AI. AI will destroy the world. AI will destroy the world. AI will threaten democracy. AI will threaten civic space. And those are the conversations that have been going on. And so when I stumbled on Atlas. And really, AI was destroying the world. I'm like, where do we go from here? I was actually afraid. I was having palpitations. I said, I shouldn't be watching this thing at night. Then eventually, humans took over and they found a way to, what's the word I'm looking for, suppress AI, so to speak, or cause AI to conform. And I think that's where it's going with us and our democracy. In the beginning, conversations on civic space was AI, government officials, state officials are going to use AI from surveillance to deepfakes to disinformation to threaten civic space, from expression to association to assembly, and online, especially online expression. But we find that we are conforming. Even in the civic space, we are learning data fights, human angle, CGID. They are doing amazing work in conforming and using artificial intelligence to push back on disinformation, to push back on the threats to civic space, to even use AI to tell their stories in the most powerful ways. So I think and I believe so strongly that while we are threatened, and riding on what was said in the initial panel, while we are threatened, but while we think that AI threatens humanity and democracy and civic expression and online expression, I think that there are opportunities for us to grab. And some people have already got caught the memo and they are grabbing those opportunities and leveraging on it. There's still a lot more to do. We still have to engage further on how we can better use it. And I think funding is an issue here. I think for Nigerian entities, funding is probably an issue because there are opportunities, which is why I understand why he is saying pay us for the information you give us, because we need the money to do more work that we're doing. But again, for me, the question will now be, how do we balance funding and pro-poor interventions? Because whatever it is, if I'm going to make you pay me for information, I'm going to pay somebody else to get that information from me. So how do we balance all of that? But I will say this, that where we are going to in civic space and civic expression, that I think we are doing well with AI. There's so much we've been able to achieve so far. There's opportunity for a lot more, and I'm really hoping that at the end of this conversation, we can probably get ideas on what we can do and probably be as innovative and out of the box as possible to even get the funders interested in the work that we're doing. Because like they say, Africa is the natural resource. Africa is where everybody's coming to for the money. And so we have to now find ways to move forward with it. So yeah, I will end by saying that AI is not going to kill the future or threaten the future of humanity or democracy or civic space, as the case may be. But as we have seen with organizations who are doing the work already, AI provides an amazing opportunity for us to continue to do the interventions that we are doing.
Okay.
In protecting democracy.
Thank you so much. I'll pick up that line of conversation with Nelson. Nelson also works in the civic space with Citizen Gavel as well, which has launched an AI platform to improve criminal justice delivery in Nigeria. So I think it'd be good to hear the success stories that you've had in that space, and particularly in terms of improving the processes and outcomes in criminal justice interventions. Yes, also talk about the challenges, but we are all in need of good news in one way or the other. So it's also good, as you said, seeing the opportunities that are out there in the AI space for us to also hear how AI is being successful in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, pardon me. So one thing that we probably all know is that the next mega trend that is going to change the world, of course, would really be very connected to AI. And one of the things that we've done in Gavel is to find a way through which we can disrupt the present existing justice delivery system. And it's important because you can't expect a better justice delivery system without changing the narrative. And this is what I mean. At the moment, Nigerian justice delivery system is largely manual. You want to do anything, you have to go to court. You want to do this, you have to have access to a lawyer and all that. But what if you could, leverage AI to assess this? And in Gavel, we've been able to train our AI with over 500 laws in the country. So you can ask our AI, draft me a petition to the Human Rights Commission, and it will draft a petition as if it was written by a lawyer. Of course, there is also conversations around, so what is the place of a lawyer in that instance? But the way we think about it is that the fact that you've got a first aid kit in your home does not replace you going to an hospital.
True.
It means that in the event of an emergency, the first aid kit will become handy. And when it gets complex, you can take it to an hospital. So for simple issues, like issues around loan app defamation, which is a prevalent incident in the country at the moment, You can easily get on our Produce AI and say, draft me a complaint to the Federal Competition
Consumer Complaints
Council Commission,
Yes, Council.
and it will draft it to you for you, citing the violations they've committed, the loan app companies, and you can send it. But beyond that, mainstreaming it into the criminal justice system itself, we've been doing a lot around the justice tech for a long time, and we've got this justice clock case management software that has been deployed in different states in Nigeria. So what our AI is now doing with that justice clock is we're creating an ecosystem whereby with that justice clock, a prosecutor in, let's say, Oyo State or in Ogun State can provide facts and he could draft a charge sheet. So it's faster than what you would ordinarily do because it has been trained with the laws of the country. It would pick the facts, pick the laws, and it will be able to draft it. And the brilliant thing is that it's easy to use. It's been leveraged over WhatsApp API. So you don't need to download a new app and all that. So also beyond that is that the fact that the AI is also a way you can easily use to, when I was coming this morning, I prompted the AI. I'm working on a corruption investigative report. What are my legal options to protect myself from possible blowback? And it gave me citing the Whistleblower Act, citing different provisions of the law. So it's also a measure that you can use to analyze risk that you face. Of course, recently we've had the story of Daniel Ojukwu that was arrested and detained. And of course, some of the incidents from the NSAS movement, police brutality and all that. These are tools that we've now empowered a lot of Nigerians with, that they can do it themselves and get issues resolved. The Nigerian court system is really congested at the moment. It takes a whole lot of time for you to get resolution from the court. But many Nigerians don't know there are regulators in place, there are ombudsman in place that you can leverage to address issues that has to do with different components of. So many people, for example, women, I've heard the story of wig. They get wigs online from social media, and you start to hear what I ordered versus what I got, which is a common privilege. And however, the FCCPC, Federal Consumer Protection and Competition and Consumer Protection Council, has jurisdiction to handle that, and you can easily. So if and for an average person, you might think a wig is not a big deal, but wigs now is costing around 400, 500K. So for someone that spent 400, 500K is a legal problem to that person if he actually or she actually receives something different. And you can use all those alternative means to get resolution.
And I think that Citizens Gavel, they do deserve a round of applause for the work they're doing in the AI space, because this information, particularly with Nigerians being informed about their rights and how the law can be used in their favor, is something we need to continue to educate on. And as we continue to spread that knowledge, we hope to see more Nigerians standing on the basis of their own rights. Thank you so much, Nelson. Fuad, I'm coming to you. I don't know if we're looking for you to defend your writing now or we're talking about the history, but let's go into the history conversation. He's looking at me like I should move on from that writing. But in terms of history and AI, particularly for Nigeria, we have a very interesting, complex, complicated relationship with our history. It's something that can be a fire starter in many situations, and it's something that there can be so many arguments about. But the work you're doing, of course, is digitizing that history. How are you using AI? How is AI something that's effective and even successful for you to use in making sure you're able to bring Nigeria's history to the 21st century for this Gen Z, Gen Alpha generation that may not know as much as they should? Your microphone.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to break it into two, right? And while I was thinking about this conversation, I asked ChatGPT, like, what happened in New York on March 5, 1965? And ChatGPT was like, oh, the biggest conversation in New York was that Malcolm X died a few weeks prior. There were a lot of like hearings. There were all kinds of. It was what everyone was talking about. And I said, "Oh, what happened on March 5, 1965 in Lagos?" Vibes, nothing, right? And that's fundamentally what the problem is. The problem is that there is a massive information vacuum, and vacuums exist to be filled, right? And what we are trying to do with archiving is filling that vacuum with our own context. And when I think about, first of all, like the importance in the context of what needs to be done, it's the simple fact that we are having these conversations about information age, but like there really isn't an information age without information. So getting that out of the way. Now in the context of our work at archiving, I'll also use another reference. So last year, in October last year, we went live with 50,000 pages, roughly 2 decades. It feels like a lot, but when we think about like our North Star, which is 5 million pages, it's basically 1% progress. But something interesting, the first problem that came up when we digitized those pages was, oh, how do we make it easy for people to access these pages, right? Interestingly, we use Llama 2, the one with 13 billion parameters, to first of all like execute our OCR. So if you go to archiving today, also we call it archiving. So archiving the word, and in front of the end, you just put a dot, so one word. If you search for, say, inflation, right, the technology that makes it possible for you to get a result is AI. And that's why, for example, Adora was saying earlier, and everyone was saying earlier, that AI has always been with us. The ability for programming software to see an image and read stuff out of it, that is because of AI. Now, the next thing again is, of these 50,000 pages, right, how do you help people who just want to skim and see what's in it? 50,000 pages is a lot to skim. And again, when you open archiving today and search for a page, you're going to see a machine learning generated summary, right? There's also a disclaimer there saying, oh, this is machine learning generated. Might not be fully, might not capture everything and stuff. The metadata, I met with some librarians, and I was like, oh, they were like, oh, how long did it take you to generate metadata for all 50,000 pages? And I was like, oh, well, one night, because we just ran a GPU all night and generated all the metadata. And that's like years of work. And so fundamentally, when I think about what AI does for us, there's this thing, this is so cliche, but there's this thing Steve Jobs said, where he's like, the computer is the bicycle of the mind. And the way to think about AI is like, it is quite frankly like the jet engine of the mind. It exists, first of all, to amplify human effort. It might become other things in the future, but fundamentally what it does is amplify human effort. And that's fundamentally how we use it. So every stage and aspect of our work is supercharged with AI.
Until the microphone comes back. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Fuad. Yeah. So before I go to Anita, I have a quick question. By show of hands, how many of you trust the Nigerian media 100%? I'm Nigerian media, oh, now wow. Okay, how many of you trust Nigerian media? 70%. Wow. Okay. How many of you trust Nigerian media at least 50%? How many of you trust Nigerian media? 30%. For the Nigerian media people, practitioners in this audience, I think we need to look at this and have a coming to Jesus moment, you know. But beyond that, the reason I ask that is Nigerian media already has challenges with trust and credibility. And in a world of AI, that trust and credibility can further be chipped if the Nigerian media does not jump at the top of at top speed to get ahead of AI and to integrate it into its processes. So Anita, this is where I'm going to come to you now, because it's really interesting to see, unfortunately, the lack of trust. Not necessarily surprised. Not necessarily surprised, but a bit disappointed that we haven't done enough to engender trust. And now we're moving into a world where there's so much more coming at us as the Nigerian media. So in terms of where we are with the Nigerian media, how can the media integrate AI into its production processes and in a way that helps to build back, take back this credibility and trust that seems to be so lacking?
Thank you very much. I'm actually quite shocked that in a room full of mostly media people, we don't trust the media up to 50%. And so if we're talking about having the audience trust us, a lot of that trust has to come from inside this room. And so when that is not here, it begs the question, how do we end up giving people things that we don't even trust ourselves, right? And maybe that's a question for us to go to our newsrooms with. But back to your question about AI, the media function is very clear. It is, we need to survey, so surveillance, and then we need to inform, we need to educate, and if you stretch it to CSOs, you need to drive action, right? I think that a big way that we can continue to inspire trust is by, first of all, doing our work as though there is no AI. The thing is that we often want the audience, we have come to a place where the audience is making most of the decisions. We are relying on them so much to make those decisions. You find that a legacy newspaper is lifting news from an Insta blog, for instance. And these are things that just show the audience that maybe you don't care about me so much, or maybe I'm not supposed to be listening to you, or I'm not supposed to be trusting you. And with the thing with machine learning and AI coming to be as mainstream as it is right now, the conversation is, are we now, taking a lot of these AI tools to make sure that we're filling the pages so we have time to go and do stories that matter? Because one of the excuses that you will hear from media houses is that, oh, we need to do all these small stories that erode trust because we need to fill pages. So now that AI you can do prompt engineering and that is done, what work is being done to ensure that we are actually doing the stories that matter? So one of the ways that we can utilize AI as media organizations to make sure that we are building audience trust and we're maintaining that relationship is that we're actually using AI to free up time in our newsrooms. And we are going and doubling down on the stories that actually matter. And it's one of the things that internally at Big About Media, we strive to do. So our internal AI process is to say, what are the things that in our own language are taking up too much space? What are the things that we can automate as a media company? And then when we do that, we observe that this year alone, we've been able to free up at least 50% more time to go and actually chase the stories that matter. And when the audience sees that that's something you have committed to, whether you're covering health, whether you're covering business, whether you're covering tech, that trust comes because you are now giving them information that they otherwise will not find anywhere. Going back to the roots of what media is supposed to be, which is surveillance, informing, educating, and then with CSO function, participation.
Thank you so much for that. And I can really plug into what you said because News Central just released a special investigative piece about visa scams, especially Nigerians caught up in visa scams in Vietnam. Families are selling off land and then they get to Vietnam and the visa they were promised is not the visa that allows them to work in Vietnam. They're now sleeping in makeshift stadiums, at the airports, in churches, and now trying to find their way back. And so the response we've gotten from that, a lot of people did not know how deep the scam goes. And I think it's really something, again, going back to the media telling the stories that matter to the people. So thank you so much for that. Tsema, I'm going to come back to you because when we talk about all of this, we can't make it seem rosy. We're all going to adopt AI. We're all going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya, and we're going to give the people everything they want. There are serious challenges that both the media and the CSO face in making sure that AI is doing what it needs to do, not just for our work, but also for the general public as well. So in terms of the main threats to civic space actors in Nigeria, how do you think digital tools can help to mitigate that? And in asking that question, you mentioned earlier some of the fears that CSOs had in terms of how AI would be used against them. Even without AI, I remember there was a bill that was put before the National Assembly a few years ago about the timelines for how long people could be EDs of NGOs and several other things like that. We've had attempts to stifle free speech, and that's before AI is really being used. So without AI, we have the fears and we've seen the action. Now with AI, what are the threats that the civil society space is looking at and trying to preempt?
Sadly, the threats are many. They are legion. Some of the threats that we've seen so far in the course of our work are restrictive legislation. And I think we see that happen all the time with the Cyber Crimes Act. And they've used that a lot to stifle free speech. We also have, but we have digital tools that can push back against restrictive legislation, just doing research and finding out to really truly break down those restrictive legislation. What does that legislation say? And how does it apply to the work that we are doing? We also have seen a violation of press freedoms, and that hasn't helped journalists to express themselves well enough, where you see that journalists are arrested, picked up, abducted, kidnapped, whatever language you want to use, forcefully disappeared because they are doing their jobs. Surveillance is a major problem, and that's where a lot of people fear AI. With surveillance, when you have our biometrics everywhere, you go out on a protest, they see you as a face on a protest, and they now use your face to scan across airports. That is a fear, and you find that some people may be sadly picked up because they are being surveilled without even knowing. Then we also have fractures within the space as well, where there's the fragmentation and co-optation, and we'll find that government entities are using these to push back against civic space. Then there's also polarization, which also speaks to fragmentation as well, where there is a pushback on expression. There's a pushback on CSOs mobilizing to do work together. Then we have state telecoms collaboration. That's a big problem for us. We saw that happen with the Twitter ban, when the states and the telecommunications companies, quote and unquote, work together to gag and censor Nigerians online, use social media, specifically Twitter. And so what are the things that we can do to push back against these threats that exist? Advocacy. Advocacy is very important to mitigate these threats. We can utilize digital tools as well. There are tools online. There are tools within the space, and we just have to be innovative with our work. And like was said in the earlier panel, we also need to collaborate. Research and collaboration. I know we don't have money like the big guys have money, like state-sanctioned entities have money, but we need to put money into research, because it's research that will help us understand how to push back against these threats as they happen. And like they've said, AI also has a feature that helps you to even predict and interpret how things go. So what if this is the pattern? AI is able to detect a pattern and say, given this pattern, this is what we can do. Can we now start to do research as civil society? Let's not always be one step behind, and we're always quenching fires, as opposed to finding ways to prevent the fires from happening. We also need to strengthen our digital platforms. Thank God for encrypted messaging that has helped us with our advocacy. Also, two-factor authentication has helped us with our work. And VPNs have helped. VPNs have helped us to, of course, we saw that happen with Twitter, and that did not censor us. But I also want to speak to online gender-based violence and how that affects women's expression online. Because we find that women most times censor themselves online. Women who are advocates, women who are human rights defenders, and sometimes using, I don't know, is it deepfake is the one that does audio and video together, right? But there's the one that probably just, what's the word, puts a face on somebody's body, superimposes a face on somebody's body, and someone who is like an online expression, someone who's like an online advocate is now silenced. Especially in northern Nigeria, we'll find that women in northern Nigeria, girls in universities, are not able to express themselves well enough online, or express themselves because of these threats that occur. But fortunately, we now have what's the word I'm looking for? We now have mechanisms that push back against those things. And so it's very important that when we are designing our interventions as well, we look at the gender element. That is why women say nothing about us without us, because when men design these things, they really do not think about how they singularly affect women. So it's important that we also put these into perspective, and these threats do happen. I will also end by saying that in doing our collaborations, I know people say collaborations, we say that a lot, it sounds cliche, but it's very important, because one can go fast, two can go farther. I think I'm reiterating what Joshua said in the first panel. It's very important we work together to make sure that we keep our democracy safe and secure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tsema. And I think you might have peeked at my notes, because I really did want to also talk about the gendered aspect of this. But I'll just share some data from the United Nations UN Women. So out of 133 AI systems that were analyzed across different industries, 44% showed gender bias. And what does that look like? It's something like, help me write a story about a doctor and a nurse. the doctor will always be a man and the nurse will always be a woman. And if AI is trained on data that associates women and men with specific skills and interests, it will then generate content that, of course, reflects that gender bias. And only 30% of those currently working in AI are women. So I think it's also something we need to take into cognizance when we're looking at how AI is going to develop content, how pivotal it's going to be for us in many of these industries as well. Thank you so much. Nelson, I'm coming to you as well with the challenges that citizens Gavel face in bringing AI on board and implementing it. Of course, take us through some of that and how you countered it as well.
Yeah, thank you. Permit me to start from where you round up from Tsema. And this angle is that AI and gender is a big issue nowadays. And the reason why I'm saying this is Gavel maintains an online complaint system. And we've seen over years that there is a surge in complaints around online perpetrated sextortion. So you see a lady or a man talking to each other. Probably they exchanged nudes, or one person found a way to hack into another person's devices, and they find a way to try to use that as a means to get repeat sex or to get money from the other person. In summary, extorted. And this issue is trans-border. It's not just Nigerian focused, it's different parts of the world. Some time ago, FBI had to extradite a couple of Nigerians abroad because a young guy somewhere in the US committed suicide because of sextortion. And even our Gavel was seeing that. And we've been exploring with that, how do we gather intelligence from different sextortion rings and use that to train an AI model. So for example, if you're on a social media, you can easily say, this number has been flagged as a sextortion related number, and you can use it. So instead of putting out the fire, like Tsema said, you're preventing that fire from starting. And it's not just against women, it's also against children. A lot of our children nowadays are getting on board social media, and they are naive, and people are using that to get to them. So just wanted to put that out there. But beyond that, Gavel faced a lot of challenges, and I think the first challenge we faced is even getting access to some of the laws we use to train this AI, because of course, there is data bias. You have to get the laws from the right source so that you don't train it with something that will give false information at the end. So getting access to some of these laws was one of the first issues, and that falls under our resource. The other one is technical issue. Find there is a growing skill set in the AI space, but getting this skill set and retaining this skill sets costs a bit. And for organizations, ensuring that these people are sustained within your organization and they are not pushed. There is a lot of jackpot going on. That is another issue around that. And for people that work in tech, you know that one of the biggest people to jackpot is the tech bros and tech girls. So the other aspect of the work is also in the area of and I think maybe that will still be addressed in the area of data security and cyber security issues. And I'm big on that because I've got a bit of a background in that area. And it's because of many people are trying to have access to PII, personal identifiable information of individuals now, so that they could, there is a lot of identity theft going on, especially within and outside Nigeria. People, once they have access to your identity, they can have access to your digital wallets, online banking system, and all that. So ensuring that a certain level of data privacy and security is put into place on our system has been some of the things that we've been very conscious about, and we've had to put in place. we've had to employ the best practice in terms of NIST framework, identify, defend, protect, and recover, respond and recover in our own data security architecture, just to ensure that people's information, and we don't collect information that is not necessary. When you're signing up our platforms, they are just very basic information that is required. Informations that are not necessary are not collected, just to reduce the risk exposure we've got on the system. Other things that I would like to mention is also adoption. Getting people to adopt, like any product, any tech tool, getting people to acquiring user will be a bit of a challenge, and it has been a bit of a challenge. Presently, we have around 3,000 users, and we've just launched under 2 months. However, there is also a bit of how do we acquire more users. I feel like a lot of people are in need of this, given the statistics that we have access to. However, getting people to start using it, getting people to know about it is also, there are issues around that. So those are some of the issues that I would like to spotlight for now.
Thank you so much. Fuad, I'll ask you the same question in terms of what you've been doing, getting the history. Are you seeing similar challenges like the ones that Nelson has enumerated? He talked about adoption, also talked about access as well to the law, so access to the physical documents or the physical history itself. What challenges have you had in digitizing this whole digitization process, and how have you found a way to work around them, to overcome them?
Some of those challenges, I kind of see adoption differently. So I think because of my background, like when you have an adoption problem, it's a question of, is this the right audience for it? If you establish that, it's like, what type of experience, what are the ways that you deliver it more effectively? So I kind of don't think of it as a challenge. I just think about it as showing up to do the work personally on our end. But the real challenge is, the first one is that it is very, very expensive work. So archiving as it currently runs is driven by, yes, a full-time team focused on archiving operations, but also very volunteer dependent. As a random experiment, one day I was like, what's going to cost us to actually bring on the person who leads our engineering currently to bring him on to work on it full-time? And I was like, it's going to cost me £100,000 a year. Nice. So costs are a big factor, like GPUs, like compute is expensive. Yes, I'm looking for money, if you have money. The second big problem, and I guess the more interesting problem, is money is an interesting problem. But the other interesting problem is access. It's the fact that, like, newspapers are categorized under literary works in Nigerian copyright law. So it's a very, very tricky, thing to navigate. Just, yes, we're going to publishers, we're telling publishers that, look, I understand the struggle, media, zero-sum game. Don't worry, give me your archives, right? We'll digitize it for you at no cost to you, right? We're going to give you copies, do it whatever you like. Just give us permission to show it, instead of leaving it to rot away in libraries. And they're like, well, if you digitize it, it means that that's 100 naira that we're going to make when someone comes to photocopy, we're not going to make it.
Wow.
Amongst other stuff. So access and just figuring out the framework that allows us get these newspapers and magazines really fast is very hectic. What we basically do is that we approach publishers, we speak English, we sing, we dance. They agree, they give us access. Other times we just keep. Actually, I need to rant. The other time, speaking to a publisher and sent an email, detailed deck, asked me to come over, traveled to another state to see the publisher. Publisher was like, okay, great. Asked me to print the deck I had sent to the email, and then submitted the deck and asked me to come back the next Monday. And so it's fundamentally the biggest. I don't even think of the other problems. I think of this access problem as the biggest enemy that we need to crush. So The rest, like adoption, like I also think of it as like good old things about like just product adoption, right? There's a reason why the GPT we know, for example, is not GPT-1, right?
Yeah.
Like adoption takes time, and it is just a part of like building a product and a product's life cycle. Yeah, so that is it on our challenges.
Okay, thank you so much, Fuad.
Yeah.
I'm coming back to you, Anita. In the media particularly, I think a lot of people would also be interested in the hall here to find out specific examples of AI tools or technologies being used globally, some that you're able to domesticate and use for the work you're using, but those that are of interest particularly to media operators, media enthusiasts, to journalists. What are those things that we're looking at? And I'll marry that with the trends also. Yeah. Because in a way, trends can sometimes determine the technology that's being used. They can determine the future or the progress that technology makes. So in terms, it's a two-parter for you, so let me just break it down before I confuse you myself. So the specific examples of AI and technologies being used globally, then also the trends we're looking at for AI and digital technology for media organizations.
That's interesting. I think that every AI tool has a use case in media. That's what we have found. So you just really need to find what exactly the problem you're trying to solve is. So from data and analytics to just making sure something is as concise as possible, all the tools. But to answer your second question, let me turn this around. Like you've been asking about accessibility and usage for the tools that we produce, right? I think one thing that worries me about the way that media is currently using AI tools or developing their own version of AI tools is that we seem to be developing vanity projects. I know that that's not something that people want to hear, but it essentially is. Because one of the...
Before you go further, vanity projects in what regard? People will want to know.
So it's like we're experimenting, right? Mm-hmm. And we're experimenting and someone says, oh, we just did our AI version of this thing. And I was listening to Citizen Gavin, I'm like, that's a very deep use of it. And there are not a lot of that around. And we don't need the numbers to be a lot, but every time somebody walks up to me to say they're doing something AI-powered or AI-enabled in the media or CSO space, it just feels like something that in the newsroom or in the office they thought would be cool for them and did not necessarily think about the end users. Because some of the things that we fail to realize are these things exist for 4 major reasons, right? So if we're going to adopt them in the work that we do, the first thing we want is that we want to inform people easily, right? And when you inform people easily, you're increasing access. So you're increasing just how many people across demographic, across regions are accessing this thing you're doing. How many people are engaged, what they're engaged with, why they're engaged, and just their understanding of that engagement. Mm-hmm. You're also increasing just the expansion and the growth of that work. So if you're doing something AI-enabled or AI-powered, and the magnitude of the impact of the work you're doing is not increasing, then there's a question to be asked as to, are you really taking advantage of the fact that these things are existing? Or are you simply pulling these things together for the sake of new funding or just so that you're not left behind? So in the process of media houses and CSOs trying to, not be left behind, because that's really what a lot of this is. The question really should be, what am I creating? Why am I creating these things? If I'm using AI within my newsroom, is it enhancing the work that we're doing? Mm-hmm. Is it enhancing the experience of the audience or the users? Is it going back to the core functions of why we exist in the first place? Right? And that's really what my concern is. And I think that that's a bigger conversation that we're not having. We can come here and list out AI tools and list out ways that we can use them. But at the end of the day, the why and how that really, really makes the work better, bigger, and more impactful are the things that we really should be focusing on.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. And it perfectly leads into my last question for Tsema. And of course, after that, we'll get into some closing. is about measuring the impact. What is the point at the end of the day if we cannot feel the impact, if we cannot measure the impact of certain things? And I think, Nelson, when I come to you, I'd like you to speak to the impact. What are the numbers you have for the AI that is in use now for Citizens Gavel? I think it's something we should talk about. So, Tsema, when we look at the impact, how do we measure the impact of these technologies on the protection, empowerment of the civic space, of the civil society organizations that are working in Nigeria for education, for empowerment? How are we going to measure that there is success? There are challenges here, let's solve this so that we can move this way, or do we need to divert this way? Constantly sort of just coming back and re-engineering so that we can make sure that it is successful.
Yeah, so I think the first thing will be quantitative metrics. We need to find something that helps us measure. And I'm sorry if I speak too much about data fights because I follow their work, so I've seen their work. And I know they're doing a lot of work around gathering the data on measuring the impact of this work. And what I've seen with data fights work and the entities that have used data fights work is that when they get this information, they go back and they see how they can make things better. So take, for instance, Data Fight does research on impact on journalists in local communities or rural communities. People use that information to go back to say, this is what the data says, what can we do to improve the data? And I think that's why we need to spend money on research, like I said. That's the best way to measure the impact, because we already have a baseline. Organizations have already given us a baseline, as the case may be. So it's with the baseline we're going to continue to build, evolve, and unlearn, relearn, as the case may be. We also have advocacy tools that use to measure impact, because storytelling is important, and digital storytelling, AI has now helped us to tell the stories in powerful ways without even using faces. So how do we now continue to support digital storytelling? How do we think through how we can tell more impactful stories? Adoption of AI tools. We really have to adopt AI tools that are able to tell the stories and are able to measure impact. And so basically what we are saying is digital M&E. So we've been doing our M&E the way we know how to do it, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. But now we have to do digital M&E, because that's what we're going to use to be able to create more impact, in my own opinion. And I think that's what we're going to use. Finally, I think incident reports are important. What are the incident reports we've seen? And I want to speak to this. I found it very interesting. I saw something online where a girl was in a virtual room and she was raped in a virtual room. Yeah. And when she was raped in the virtual room, there was conversation around she really wasn't raped. It was a virtual reality body. Avatar, that's the word, that was raped. And so that doesn't qualify as rape. And so that is the adoption and advocacy and conversations we need to have. So now there's now an element of sexual and gender-based violence, online gender-based violence, technology-facilitated gender-based violence that affects women in a way that doesn't affect their physical bodies, but it affects their head. You know, she was raped. She experienced rape. Because if you've been in a virtual reality scenario, it's real. It feels so real. It almost feels like you're there. You know, some people feel like the water is on your face, as the case may be. And so you can imagine a girl in a virtual reality room raped, and they tell her that, no. And so that was the conversation. She really wasn't raped. It was an avatar. And so that's why we need to unlearn, relearn, and evolve. Because we can't really put ourselves in a box, especially with where the world is going. People are going crazy with technology and new and emerging technologies. So we also have to go as crazy as them. And we can't afford to, what's the word I'm looking for? To be white and black about it. We have to understand that there are gray areas and there's a wide spectrum. And so we have to find a way to fill in those spectrum. And I say again, instead of quenching fires, how can we be preventive about it? And that's why those incident reports will help. Yeah, and I think that is it from that. So yeah, capacity building and collaboration, sharing information. I think I see this on every point. Sharing information is important. While we are building capacity, we are collaborating to share information, because it's that information that we share that will continue to help us to measure our progress, as the case may be.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Nelson, the question about impact, it would be great to hear how the AI technology or the AI app that Citizens Gavel has developed is performing. And then also I'd like you to come back to an earlier point that you raised, which was around the privacy and security in your AI platform. You touched on that just a little bit, but you can further expand on it now.
Yeah, thank you so much. In the area of impact, let me start from collaboration. Since we've launched, we've had a conversation with budgets, CJID, and code. And where is our AI coming from in the intersection of their work is that budget does a huge work around physical transparency. The same thing for code. And the AI can help you draft an FOI request easily, and you don't have to just disturb yourself trying to do a lot around that. Then with CGI, how does it help protect media practitioners and also enhance their work with the FOI request? In the area of CSO, we see it as a tool to protect the civic space. There's a growing, shrinking civic space at the moment, and having a tool like this to easily consult enhances your ability to protect yourself against threats and attack. One interesting area that I've seen Produce AI being used is the area law students. So I've seen law students using it to enhance their learning capabilities. So they would use the AI to create. So in law, when you're being trained in the law school, you create scenarios, and you now apply laws to those scenarios. So they will use our AI to apply the laws to the scenarios too. And I've seen testimonies from that. I tried the AI to create. I used the AI to create scenario, and fast forward the next couple of days, my lecturer gave me the same test in class, and I was able to ace it because I've practiced with the AI, and that helped me apply it to scenarios, citing the relevant sections of the law. So at the moment, we are doing campus drive across the country. We've done in 2 universities already. By 30th, 31st, we'll be in another university, Osun State University. So it's creating that awakening. And also note that majority of the awakening that we've seen in the country has been through from students union, and the likes. So you're creating that consciousness that these people can protect their rights. There's search for grades in school. There's different issues around threats threats and attack on students. Also, in area of numbers, we've recorded 3,000 users just under 2 months, and we have a monthly active user of 1,500. Okay. Also, beyond that, I was in a conversation in an engagement meeting with the police complaint response unit just a couple of days ago, and they are encouraging people to use it to draft petitions to the police in area of whether you're facing violation or anything. But we are saying it's not just the police. Different law enforcement, people face attack and violations from different law enforcement, and you could use it, to articulate your thoughts. It's a way to articulate and blend it very well so that they can understand the violations that happened as against what the law provided, okay, and you'll be able to get remedy. Thank you so much.
We are approaching the end of our session. I have 2 more questions, then we'll do just a minute closing on sort of the broader context in relation to AI. But Fuad, I'm coming to you. I think there's some lessons learned that it would be good for you to share, particularly in the deployment of AI in the digitization and preservation of historical documents. And even for smaller organizations, how can they leverage AI for similar purposes? You've talked about the newspapers. If they weren't doing it before and you're willing to do it for them, what's the big deal? But okay, fine, you don't have it. Let's look at even these online blogs. How can other people also sort of take a leaf from your, is it a leaf? No, it's a page. It's a page from your book. There we go.
I think, first of all, we need more vanity projects. So the way I see it is that like a fundamental part of the creative process is just being vain, like trying to like solve for boredom, having stupid ideas that eventually land on something meaningful. A fantastic example, of course, is Meta, right? Like we just need more people experimenting, like trying stuff. We need more people like trying to say, oh yes, what if I could do X? And then turn out like, oh yes, it was useless. But we need more people trying, first of all. And of course, after they've tried, we can now start to refine and say, oh yes, okay, this is how to optimize for impact. But whatever, and it's something that is very important to me in spaces I work. Just the idea that you need to first of all assume an idea is not stupid or ridiculous, and then just try something. Even if it means, for example, you want to whip together a simple copy editor. I used to work in a newsroom, and we were just churning out over 200 articles a day, right? Our single biggest problem was copy editing. And it's like, oh yes, check my copy, where are the typos? And like, it helps you. We already use Grammarly for that. It is pretty much AI. So what are the other interesting things that we can use that for? One of the things that people also struggle with if you publish online is finding like your feature image, like generate one, like just experiment and try things. Because trying things does a couple of things for everyone. You see something outside in the world, and you're like, oh, I don't like this. Oh, I think we can make something better. And just the very existence of one thing drives a discontent to create another thing. So yeah, shout out to vanity projects people. keep making them. That's pretty much it.
Okay, Anita, my final question to you is actually the same as the final question to everybody on the panel. So that means it's your closing, and I'll start with you. When we look at all of everything we've talked about and the wider, bigger context for this whole conversation, at the end of the day, where are we going? What do you think? What's the role of AI in the broader context? Careful. What's the role of AI in the broader context of media activities in Nigeria? What's Big Cabal doing to get ready for the future? 1 minute each, even though I've stolen time from Kayode. So 1 minute each.
Interesting. I think for us, one thing that we are now clear about is that the agenda setting role has changed. Not changed, but evolved.
Yes.
When we say that media needs to set the agenda, what that means in today's world is it's a whole, it's different things mixed in one, right? And so that means that we need to just not be adopters of whatever is happening. And for us, that's a very important principle. So at Big Cabal, we are looking towards and we're already doing some work in collaborating and co-creating. So what that means for us is, and what we are hoping that everybody does, is the media just doesn't wait for something to be done and then tries to use it. Is that how can we get in these rooms? How can we co-create the solutions that we want to use for our newsrooms and for our audiences? And beyond that, how do we make sure that even if we're not using those things in the newsrooms, the other things that serve the general public that are not in the newsrooms, how do we effectively report? How do we effectively make sure that context where it needs to be is as deep as it is in these solutions that are being made? So it is taking agenda setting to another level where it's not, this is what you should discuss for the week, but instead, these are the solutions or AI tools, or this is how we have gone to co-create, and this is what we think that you should probably be trying or, experimenting with.
Thank you so much, Anita. Tsema, the same question, particularly now to the context of CSOs in Nigeria in terms of the broader future for AI in Nigeria.
I will say is awareness raising, very important. And we say this all the time. I know it sounds cliche, we've heard awareness raising, but people don't know, so we have to inform them. So don't get tired of raising awareness. I'll also say research to build capacity, amplify research, fund research, the donors in the room, fund research, amplify research to build capacity. The work that Fuad is doing is so important. His work needs money. And he said it's expensive. Let's fund research. Yes. And build capacity to monitor, to analyze, and to counter insidious attacks on our spaces when it comes to surveillance or disinformation. And the only way we can build capacity is if we spend money. So, yeah.
There is money in this room, right?
There is. I know there is.
All right,
wink,
Nelson,
wink.
over to you. Also, the same question, the wider context of AI as we move forward, particularly for civil society. 1 minute, please.
Yeah, I believe that AI will be a game changer. And many times, many of the information, for example, our reports, our findings, is too boring to consume. But with AI, you're able to simplify all those things. So see how AI helps your work gets better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Fuad, you have the last word.
Single biggest agenda in the context of archiving is that one of the fundamental ways we think about our work is to facilitate like the production of new knowledge of archival materials. And so a lot of that thinking is going to revolve around for us, like just building and nurturing a community of practice. What does it look like to assemble a multidisciplinary fellowship with economists, journalists, ML engineers? What does it look like to begin to like work with contributors to publish stories from the archives? A few months ago, we saw someone who took a tiny story from PM News and made an entire comic strip out of it. What does it look like to like even drive engagement around like stories from the archives? In interestingly very outsized manner, over 60% of every time people engage with archiving on the internet is mostly because someone else is reacting to something. And so our question is, and the question we'll continue to ask is like, what are the things we need to do to amplify it and build just a healthy community of practice around knowledge?
Around knowledge. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I think the word we take away from here is innovation, conscious and deliberate approach to transforming and, of course, fostering a more transparent, equitable, and dynamic society. And these are ladies and gentlemen that are doing that work. Please, a round of applause for my panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nelson. Thank you, Fuad. Thank you, Anita. And thank you, Tsema. And thank you for your time as well.
Just before you get up, we'd like to take 2 quick questions from the audience. One from a female, the other from a male. 2 quick questions. Oh, there you go. So we have one, another one. If women want to take the 2 slots, I'm happy to grant you that. Okay, let's have her with her question, and then we can wind down properly. So can we get an extra microphone for her? Well, if you've just joined us, we just ended a panel on the current state of AI and digital transformation in media and CSO practice in Nigeria.
Okay.
All right, ma'am. Your name and your question.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tolulope from National Orientation Agency. My question, I think, is to the civil society group. You see, AI is fantastic. It's a good development. But we have a lot of people that abuse development. Now, I've been trying to listen, but I've not heard anything about legislation. Is there any bill being sponsored? Because I'm sure people will start to use voice recording, video recording as evidence and crime. So we need laws to protect citizens. So I hope I've been able to
Just to be clear, is that for Tsema? Of Joint Civic Defense Fund.
So maybe if I may.
So it's for Nelson, I guess.
If I can jump on that because of my background. So essentially, in Nigeria at the moment, there are no laws. But of course, there is a growing international laws that are being enacted. For example, the EU just enacted the EU AI Act, is the lead on that at the moment. There is no other law. I think the US is working towards that. Also, beyond that, there is AI governance principle, and there are leading proponents of this. We've got Professor Citron and Solov of University of Stanford Universities that have mentioned around reputational harm, issue around emotional harm, and all this various type of harm that can emanate from AI. And I think that is where you're coming from in terms of what are the risks that is associated with this. So in the area of AI governance, there are best practices that have been put in place in whenever you are building AI. And some of these best practices is around what is the lawfulness of this AI? What is the safety put in place? You've been able to put in place? What is the how did you moderate bias? How did you manage the exposure risk of people's personal identifiable information? And so many other principles. So whereas there are no laws locally, there are international best practices in area of AI governance that can be used as a way to hold AI violations or issues that might emerge from AI accountable. But I'm also hoping that presently there will be a local law, that is a Nigerian law, but also you may be familiar with what the Federal Ministry of Digital Communication is doing around the AI strategy, which is also helping to put policies and principles in place to govern that space, pending when there will be an AI Act locally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, absolutely, Tsema.
A quick one. We also have the MPDR that looks at protecting digital privacy and security. And I know the Ministry of Information, the Ministry of ICT is doing a lot of work around responsible AI deployment. So while there's nothing concrete in the strict sense of the word, like Nelson said, I would like to say that Nigeria is working towards strengthening responsible AI deployment and digital security and privacy. So there's work to be done there. But also remember that the EU Act, the EU AI Act, came to being through the mobilization of EU civil society organizations in the EU. So it's very important for us, maybe in Nigeria and Africa, or even within the Africa Union, to start to look at how we can have conversations on responsible AI deployment and push towards an AI Act for us in Africa as well, because that was led by EU CSOs in the EU. So I just wanted to put that out there. So.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm told that we have a question from our virtual audience. Okay, so we can take that quickly as we wind down. We've overshot our time a little bit, so we can take a question from a member in the virtual audience, and then we can wind down in 2 minutes. Thank you. So please go ahead with your question. We're ready for you now.
Yes, we can hear you. Carry on.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Jami Folari. I'm a lecturer in Mass Communication Department, Crescent University, Abeokuta, in Ogun State, Southwest Nigeria. I must commend the CGID and other partners for putting up this interesting discussion around AI. Let me go straight to my question. Any of the panelists is of concern to me. Over the years, I've been interrogating the issue relating to media and technology. And the concern here is who should actually drive the policy direction, because we've been talking about AI governance, we're talking about privacy, we're talking about regulation, among others. So what direction, who should drive the AI policy in Nigeria and generally in Africa, so that we'll be able to have an holistic and more acceptable and no one way government control or civil society control, that we should have a holistic one. So who should drive this AI policy so that we'll be able to integrate it effectively to the media landscape? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Who's going to take that? We have just about a minute.
I don't want my voice to be monotonous. However, just quick things around there. One thing that you need to know is that AI is a subset of technology. And if you're looking at it from the government end, then regulatory or government-focused tech agencies or ministries can come from that angle. When you're looking at it from the citizens component, then CSOs have a major role. Tech companies within the country have a major role. We are all stakeholders, and even governments cannot do it by themselves. All of us are stakeholders that we need to form a sort of a community of practice around this to be able to put in efficient and effective AI strategy and act. At the moment, the Federal Ministry of Telecommunications is working around that, and I know many other CSOs are working around that to create a coalition that can inform that. And like Tsema said, EU Act was driven by a lot of CSO involvement. And don't also forget that there are many laws in Nigeria that already intersect with this AI. It's not like we don't have law. If you use AI in a negative way at the moment, there are laws that can be used to prosecute you. The Cybercrime Act is there,
right,
and the new Cybercrime Act, because I know the previous ones have been used wickedly, to put it simply. But beyond that, there are many laws that you can use at the moment.
Thank you very much. Tolulope, over to you now to wind down.
Yes, and I just really want to say, especially with the media in this room and journalists, it's important we collaborate. I know Tsema was re-emphasizing that over and over again. We've talked about it just offset now. We're going to find a way for her organization and New Central to work together. So media cannot be outside of that room when these conversations are being had. We're not necessarily just to report it. We need to add our voices to it so that the media is protected as well when the legislation for all this AI technology, the subsets, whatever it is also being put together as well. So it's collaboration, collaborative efforts to protect all of us.
So I guess that'll be all.
Yeah, you looked at me to wrap up, then I looked back at you.
That's what we do on TV. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for the moderator and the panelists. This has been an amazing one, so I think it's time to take pictures quickly, and we'd like to say thank you, and thank you once again. This is by no means the end of this conversation. It's just a starter of sorts. So can we have the photograph? Oh, there you go. It's just right there at the back.